There are men who build empires out of silence, and Damen Voss was the most dangerous kind, the kind who never raised his voice because he never needed to. For 23 years, he controlled Chicago's underground not through rage, but through patience, calculation, and the particular cruelty of someone who understood exactly how much a person could lose before they broke. He gave one command that destroyed everything he had with the one woman who ever came close to knowing him. He told her to get rid of their child. And she left without screaming, without tears, without a single word of hate, which turned out to be the most devastating thing she could have done to him. If you've ever watched someone walk away from you without looking back, you know that silence is louder than anything. Drop a like and leave a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now stay with me, because what Damen Voss didn't know that night is about to change everything. Passant. The night Elena told him it was raining, not the dramatic kind of rain that arrives like a warning, just Chicago rain, steady and indifferent, the kind that makes the city smell like rust and old concrete. Damen was standing at the floor-to-ceiling window of their penthouse on the 42nd floor, looking down at the river below, when Elena came into the room carrying a small white paper bag from the pharmacy. She set it on the kitchen island without saying a word. He turned, looked at the bag, looked at her face, and understood everything before she spoke. "Tell me I'm wrong," she said. He wasn't. Elena Vale was 31 years old. She had dark hair she kept pulled back when she was thinking hard about something, and she was always thinking hard about something. She had built a legal consulting practice from nothing while Damen built everything else, and she was the kind of woman who carried her intelligence like a quiet weapon, not something she showed off, something she used when it counted. She had known, on some level, for months that something had shifted between them. She had cataloged the evidence the way she cataloged everything: the late calls he stepped outside to take, the trips that ran longer than explained, the particular way his eyes had stopped tracking toward her when she entered a room. She had told herself it was the pressure of the business. She had told herself a lot of things. "Say something," she said. Damen turned back toward the window. Below them, a cab moved slowly through the rain, its headlights cutting orange into the wet street. He put his hands in his pockets. He felt the familiar pull of his own discipline, the thing that had kept him alive for over 2 decades in a world that dismantled men who hesitated. "Don't explain, don't apologize, don't hand anyone the knife they'll use to cut you." "How far along?" he asked. He heard her breath catch, just once, like a small door closing. 8 weeks, she said. He nodded, still not turning around. He was doing the math, see, not the emotional math, the logistical kind, which was the only kind his mind defaulted to when pressure arrived. He was thinking about timing, about the business in Detroit he was closing in 6 days, about Vincent Caruso, who had been watching Damen's operation with the particular interest of a man who wanted to absorb it, about the fact that a child, his child, would be the single most exploitable vulnerability anyone had ever found in him. He thought about all of that in approximately 4 seconds. Then he said the thing that ended their marriage. "Take care of it." The silence that followed was different from any silence Damen Voss had ever produced. He had used silence as a weapon his entire career. He understood its weight, its uses, the way it could compress a room until a man confessed just to make the pressure stop. But the silence Elena Vale produced in the next 10 seconds was not something he had manufactured. It was something she absorbed, and he understood, even as the words left his mouth, that he had just handed her something she would carry for the rest of her life. "Take care of it," she repeated. Her voice was flat, not cold, flat, like a frequency he couldn't read. He turned then. She was looking at him with an expression he had never seen on her face, and he had studied her face for 9 years. There was no rage in it, no tears forming at the edges of her eyes. There was something worse, a kind of finality, clean and complete, like a calculation she had just finished running. She picked up the pharmacy bag from the island. She walked to the bedroom. He heard drawers opening, the zip of the large bag she kept on the top shelf of the closet. He stood at the window and listened to his wife pack, and he did not move. She came back through the living room with the bag over one shoulder. She stopped near the door and looked at him across the length of the room. "I'll have my attorney contact yours," she said. Then she was gone. Damon stayed at the window for a long time after that. The rain didn't change. The city didn't change. He told himself the decision had been correct. He told himself he had protected the business, protected her, protected the child from a life lived in the orbit of what he did and what he was. He told himself all of that with the precise mechanical efficiency of a man who had built a 23-year career on never questioning his own conclusions. He was very good at lying to himself. He had been practicing since he was 19 years old and made his first decision that couldn't be taken back. The divorce papers arrived in 3 weeks. He signed them on a Tuesday without reading them closely. His attorney had reviewed them. That was enough. He poured 2 fingers of bourbon and sat in the apartment alone and told himself it was over, the way you tell yourself a wound has stopped bleeding while you're still pressing the cloth against it. It was not over. 6 months passed. Damen ran the operation the way he always had, with precision, distance, and the kind of controlled calm that made people around him nervous, because they understood that stillness in certain men wasn't peace. It was preparation. He completed the Detroit deal. He managed the pressure from Caruso's people with a combination of strategic concession and quiet threat. He slept 4 hours a night. He ate mechanically. He ran 4 miles every morning along the lakefront and returned to the penthouse that smelled like nothing in particular because Elena's presence, her perfume, her books stacked on the coffee table, the particular way she left cabinet doors slightly open, had long since faded. He had told himself he didn't notice. He had eventually stopped telling himself that, because the lie had grown too heavy. Marcus Webb, who had been Damon's right hand for 11 years and the only person alive who told him the truth without editorial softening, said something in October that Damen carried without responding to. They were in the back of a car moving through the South Side, reviewing a property transfer, and Marcus looked up from the documents and said, "You look like a man who's been carrying something dead around for a while." Damen hadn't answered. "I'm not judging," Marcus said. "I'm observing. There's a difference." "Keep reading," Damen said. Marcus kept reading, but the observation sat in Damen's chest like a splinter that hadn't worked its way to the surface yet. Present, low-level, irritating in the way only the true things are irritating. He had, in fact, stopped seeing the woman he had been with when Elena found out. He hadn't made a decision about it, hadn't sat down and reasoned through the ethics or the logic. He had simply lost interest the way you lose interest in something that turned out to be less than what you were looking for. And the recognition of what that said about his choices over the previous 2 years was something he refused to look at directly. He had been a particular kind of fool, the kind who mistakes discipline for character and control for love. He understood this the way you understand something you can't unknow, which is badly, and with a specific kind of anger directed almost entirely at yourself. He saw her in November. He wasn't supposed to be in Phoenix. He was there on a one-day diversion. A man named Reeves had requested a meeting in Scottsdale to discuss a property Damen was liquidating, and Damen had taken a private flight and planned to be back in Chicago by midnight. He was walking through the terminal at Sky Harbor, his coat over his arm, phone in hand, when he stopped. Elena was 20 feet away. She was moving toward the exit with a rolling carry-on and a tote bag over one shoulder, and she was wearing a loose linen shirt that fell below her hips, but not loose enough. Not loose enough that Damen Voss, who had spent 9 years learning the geography of her body, couldn't tell immediately what he was seeing. She was pregnant, not 8 weeks. Not the early invisible weight of something just begun. She was visibly, significantly, deeply pregnant, and for approximately 3 seconds Damen's mind went completely blank, in a way it had not gone blank since he was 22 years old and had his first real brush with the kind of violence that showed him exactly what human beings were capable of doing to each other. She hadn't done it. She had not taken care of it. She had walked out of his apartment 6 months ago with his child inside her, and she had said nothing. She had gone somewhere, this apparently Arizona, the desert, somewhere far from Chicago, and she had kept the baby, and she had told him nothing. The divorce papers that arrived 3 weeks later had contained no mention of it. Her attorney had said nothing. She had said nothing. She had simply disappeared into a different life and let him believe the one thing that was no longer true. He was going to be a father. He stood in the terminal with people moving around him, and he understood something that the next several months would only confirm. The man who controlled everything had not controlled this. Not because he could have. Because Elena Vale had made a choice he had not anticipated, and she had made it completely. And whatever he felt about what that meant, and he felt things he did not have language for, standing there in Sky Harbor with his coat over his arm. One of those feelings was something he hadn't expected. It felt distantly and unmistakably like relief, which frightened him more than anything else had in a very long time. He didn't approach her. He stood by the pillar near gate B12 and watched her move through the terminal with the particular stride she'd always had, purposeful, slightly forward-leaning, like she was already thinking about the next thing. And he watched her disappear through the exit doors, and he did not follow her. He went to his meeting in Scottsdale. He closed the property deal in 45 minutes. He sat in the back of the car on the way back to the airport and said nothing to his driver for the entire ride, which his driver, a man named Cortez, who had worked for him for 6 years, understood was not an invitation for conversation. On the plane back to Chicago, Damen opened his laptop and stared at a spreadsheet for 40 minutes without reading a single number. He had told her to end it. She had refused. She had hidden it from him, from his attorneys, from everyone connected to his world, and she had done it so cleanly that for 6 months he had believed the thing that was not true. And now he was going to have a daughter. He was sure it was a daughter. He could not have explained why, but he was sure. And that daughter was going to grow up somewhere in Arizona with his ex-wife and no father. And the only reason for that was the decision he had made standing at a window in the rain while his wife packed her bag. He closed the laptop. He poured a small glass of water and drank it slowly and thought about the kind of man he had been for the last 23 years. The architecture of it, the decisions stacked one on top of the other like load-bearing walls, each one logical in isolation, each one adding to a structure that had eventually become a prison he had designed himself. He thought about what Marcus had said. He thought about Elena's face at the window of the terminal, the way she walked, the weight of what she was carrying. He thought about the word his mind had produced when he understood she had kept the baby. Relief. He set the glass down and pressed his fingers against his eyes, and for the first time in longer than he could calculate, Damen Voss sat with something uncomfortable and did not immediately find a way to control it. Marcus was waiting at the penthouse when he got back. This was not unusual. Marcus had a key and used it with the particular ease of someone who had been in enough difficult rooms with Damen that formality had long since dissolved. He was sitting at the kitchen island with a coffee and a tablet, reviewing something, and he looked up when Damen came in and read something in Damen's face that made him set the tablet down. "Bad meeting?" Marcus asked. "The meeting was fine." "Something else, then." Damen dropped his coat on a chair and stood in the kitchen with his hands on the counter, looking at nothing in particular. He was aware of how he must look, untethered, which was a word no one in his life had ever applied to him, and he was too tired to perform otherwise. "I saw Elena," he said. Marcus didn't say anything right away. He picked up his coffee and turned it slowly in his hands. "Where?" "Phoenix. Sky Harbor. She was coming through the terminal." "Was she alone?" "Yes." Pause. "You talked to her?" "No." Another pause. Damen could see Marcus assembling the rest of it. The why, the what does this mean? And he could see the moment Marcus got there, because Marcus's face did a small careful thing it did when he was adjusting to information he hadn't expected. "She's still pregnant," Marcus said. Not a question. "Yes." The silence in the kitchen was the kind that filled a room. Damen walked to the window, his default, the window, the distance, the city below that had always been easier to look at than the interior of his own situation, and stood with his hands in his pockets. "You told her to—" "I know what I told her. And she—" "I know." Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then, "What are you going to do?" Damen didn't answer immediately. He was looking at the river below, the same river he'd been looking at 6 months ago, when his wife set a pharmacy bag on the kitchen island, and his life went in the direction it went. He was thinking about the word again. Relief. He was thinking about what it meant that the first thing he felt when he understood Elena had kept the baby was not anger, not calculation, not the logistical assessment of risk and exposure. It was relief. It meant something he wasn't ready to say out loud yet. "I need you to find out where she's living," Damen said. Marcus's voice was careful. "Why?" "Because I need to know." Damen. Marcus only used his name like that. Plain, no title, no distance. When he was about to say something that would cost him something to say. What happened 6 months ago? That's not something you fix with information. I know that. You can't. I'm not going to do anything, Damen said. I just need to know where she is. Marcus looked at him for a long time. Damen didn't turn from the window. All right, Marcus finally said. The information came back in 4 days. Elena Vale had relocated to a town called Ridgeline in the Sonoran Desert, approximately 90 miles northeast of Phoenix. She was living with her grandmother, Connie Vale, on a property that Connie had owned for over 30 years. A 2-story house on 3 acres with a covered porch and a well and a stretch of high desert that went flat toward the mountains. Elena had set up a small remote consulting practice. She appeared to be healthy. She was due in January. Damen read the report once. He set it on the kitchen island next to his coffee and read it once more. Then he sat for a while looking at nothing. He had built everything he had by knowing what to do next and doing it without hesitation. That clarity had never left him in 23 years. Even his worst decisions, and he had made decisions that cost people things they didn't get back, had been made with the cold certainty of a man who trusted his own calculus above everything else. He did not know what to do next. That was new. That was so new it sat in his chest like a foreign object, and he turned it over carefully and tried to understand what it meant, this not knowing, this absence of the automatic answer that had always been there when he needed it. What he understood, slowly, sitting at the kitchen island with the report in front of him, was that every tool he possessed was wrong for this. The tools he had, leverage, patience, information, the ability to wait longer than the other person, none of them applied. You could not leverage your way back into a woman's trust after what he had done. You could not outweight a person who had already decided to exist without you. Information didn't help when the problem wasn't a lack of information. The problem was 23 years of choosing a particular kind of life, and 1 night in the rain, and 4 words. Take care of it. He folded the report and put it in the inside pocket of his jacket. He booked a flight to Phoenix for Thursday. He drove to Ridgeline alone. He had told Marcus he was going to Arizona to look at a land acquisition, which was technically not untrue. He had, on the drive out, identified 3 properties in the area that could form the basis of a legitimate investment. But Marcus was not a man who had spent 11 years reading Damen Voss without developing an accurate internal detector for the difference between what Damen said and what Damen meant. And when Damen told him, Marcus had simply said, "Be careful," and not asked anything further. The drive from Phoenix was 90 miles of open desert, and Damen drove it in the kind of silence he wasn't used to. Not the productive silence of a man thinking through a problem, but the uncomfortable silence of a man who didn't yet know what he was driving toward. The landscape was unlike anything he'd spent significant time in. He was a city man. He understood cities, their logic, their rhythm, the specific grammar of street grids and density, and the particular human pressure of people living close together. The desert was something else. It was too open, too honest. It didn't have anywhere to hide. He found the property without difficulty. The address from the report matched a mailbox at the end of a gravel drive that ran maybe 200 yards to the house, a wide, low building with a covered porch running the full length of the front, surrounded by mesquite and ironwood and the particular high desert quiet that Damen had never encountered and did not know what to do with. He parked at the end of the drive and sat in the car. He was not a man who sat in cars and thought about what to do next. He was a man who walked into rooms and understood them immediately and positioned himself accordingly. But he sat in the car for a few minutes, in the desert quiet, trying to identify what he had come here to say, what he was offering, what he was asking for. He came up empty on all of it. He got out of the car anyway. He had walked maybe 50 yards up the gravel drive when the screen door of the house opened. He stopped. A woman came out onto the porch. Not Elena. Older, small and wire-thin with white hair pulled back and the particular expression of a woman who had been watching a car sit at the end of her driveway for 6 minutes and had decided she'd given it long enough. Connie Vale, Elena's grandmother. She looked at him across the distance of the drive with eyes that were dark and direct and entirely without fear. She recognized him. He could tell from the lack of surprise on her face, and she assessed him the way people assess a threat they've had time to prepare for. "You got some nerve," she said, her voice carried easily in the desert air. Damon stopped where he was. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "I do." Connie studied him. She was holding a glass of iced tea and she took a sip of it, watching him, and the screen door didn't open again. "She doesn't know you're here," Connie said. "No." "You planning to surprise her?" "No, I'm not here to do anything. I just—" He stopped. He was aware he didn't have a sentence that ended correctly. "I needed to see that she was all right." Connie made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh, but was in the same family. She sat down in one of the porch chairs and looked at him with the kind of patience that only comes from having outlasted a large number of difficult situations. "You want to come up here and sit down," she said. "You can. But you come up here, you're not here for yourself. You understand me?" Damon looked at the house. He thought about the 9 years he'd spent with Elena, about the airport terminal, about the word that had come to him unbidden and would not leave. "I understand," he said. He walked up the drive. He did not know, sitting down in the other porch chair while Connie Vale assessed him with the quiet authority of a woman who had earned it, that Elena was watching from the second-floor window with her hand pressed flat against the glass and her heart doing something she had not given it permission to do. He did not know that she had seen the car before Connie did, and had stood at that window for 6 full minutes before her grandmother went out. He did not know that she had spent those 6 minutes telling herself she felt nothing and that the telling had not taken. He didn't know any of that yet. What he knew, sitting on Connie Vale's porch in the desert afternoon with the sun dropping toward the mountains and the air smelling like dust and creosote, was that he was in the right place for the first time in a very long time. He couldn't have explained why. He had nothing to offer, no plan, no leverage, no angle. He was just a man sitting on a porch in a place he had no business being, waiting for something he didn't know how to ask for. And somewhere above him, behind glass, Elena Vale was watching him stay. That was the thing she had never believed he could do. She was not ready for what it would cost her to keep believing he couldn't. He was still there the next morning. Elena discovered this the way she discovered most unwelcome things, by not being able to sleep. By lying in the dark, listening to her own heartbeat in the particular desert quiet that had taken her weeks to stop finding threatening, and then by going to the window at 6:15 in the pale gray before the sun fully committed to rising, and seeing the rental car parked at the end of the gravel drive, exactly where it had been the night before. She stood at the window with her hand on the curtain and her jaw tight and her stomach doing something she was not interested in acknowledging. He had slept in the car. Damen Voss, who owned 4 properties in 3 states and had spent 23 years in rooms that cost more per night than most people made in a week, had spent the night folded into a rental sedan at the end of a gravel drive in the Sonoran Desert. She didn't know what to do with that. She had prepared herself for a version of him she knew, the one who arrived with a plan, with leverage, with the particular smooth certainty of a man who had never walked into a room without knowing how he was going to own it. She had prepared arguments, she had prepared silence. She had prepared the version of herself that had spent 6 months building a life without him and had become very good at it. She had not prepared for him sleeping in the car. She let the curtain fall and went downstairs. Connie was already in the kitchen, which was not surprising because Connie Vale had been rising before the sun for 71 years and showed no indication of changing. She was making coffee in the ancient percolator she refused to replace, and she did not look up when Elena came in but said, "He's still there." "I know," Elena said. "Car didn't move all night." "I know, Graham." Connie poured 2 cups and set one on the counter near Elena without comment. She was, Elena had always thought, the most efficient person she had ever known. A woman who had outlasted a difficult marriage and a harder decade that followed and had come out of it without bitterness, which Elena had never entirely understood but had always been grateful for. "What do you want to do?" Connie asked. Elena wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. Her lower back was aching, which it did most mornings now, and the baby had shifted in the night to a position that made deep breathing complicated, and she was 31 years old and 8 months pregnant, and her ex-husband was sleeping in a car at the end of the driveway, and she genuinely did not know the answer to that question. "Nothing," she said. "I don't want to do anything." Connie sipped her coffee. "All right. He can sit there. Okay. He'll leave eventually. Connie said nothing to that, which was a specific kind of response Elena recognized. She looked at her grandmother's profile. The white hair, the calm expression, the way she held her coffee cup like she had all the time in the world. What? Elena said. I didn't say anything. You didn't have to. Connie set her cup down and turned to look at her granddaughter with the direct, unornamented attention that had always made Elena feel simultaneously seen and slightly cornered. I talked to him for a while yesterday, before you came down. I know, I watched. He didn't say much. That's not unusual for him. No, Connie said, but the way he didn't say much was different. Elena looked out the kitchen window. The early light was coming in flat and gold across the desert floor, and the mountains to the east were going from gray to purple to the particular burnt orange that had become the thing she set her internal clock by out here. She had not expected to love the desert. She had come because Connie was here and because it was as far from Chicago as she could manage on short notice, and she had arrived in the summer heat feeling like something scraped raw, and the landscape had turned out to be exactly the right thing. All that space, all that honest emptiness, nowhere for anything to hide. Different how? She said. It wasn't quite a question. Connie was quiet for a moment. Like a man who finally ran out of road, she said, and knows it. Elena didn't answer that. She finished her coffee standing at the counter and went back upstairs to get dressed, and she did not go to the window again, and she told herself that was a choice she was making and not something she was afraid of. Dear, Damen woke at 5:48 with a crick in his neck and the particular disorientation of not knowing for 2 or 3 seconds where he was. Then the desert came back into focus. The flat gray light, the silhouettes of the saguaro against the early sky, the gravel drive leading up to the house with its lit kitchen window. And he remembered. He got out of the car slowly. Every joint in his body registered its displeasure. He was 44 years old, and he had slept in vehicles before. In the early years when he didn't have money for hotels, and later when circumstances required it, and his body had tolerated it then with the easy resilience of a younger man. His body was less forgiving now. He stretched against the side of the car and looked at the house and breathed the desert air, which was cold in the early morning in a way he hadn't anticipated. He had not planned to stay the night. He had sat on Connie's porch for 2 hours while the afternoon went to evening, and Connie had asked him questions in the unhurried way of someone who wasn't trying to catch him but simply wanted to understand what she was dealing with, and he had answered them with more honesty than he was accustomed to. What did he want? He didn't know. What did he think he could offer? He didn't know that either. Why had he come? And that one he had sat with for a moment before saying, because I needed to see that she was all right. And Connie had looked at him with an expression he couldn't fully read and said, she's better than all right. She's been building something. You should know that before you do anything else. When the light had fully gone and Connie had gone inside, Damen had sat alone on the porch for another 20 minutes. He had meant to drive back to Phoenix. He had gotten into the car and driven to the end of the gravel drive and stopped and sat there and could not identify a compelling reason to continue, and so he had stayed. He took his phone out now and called Marcus. Marcus picked up on the second ring, which meant he was already awake, which meant he had been tracking Damon's location and knew something had changed from the plan. You're still in Ridgeline, Marcus said. I am. You see her? No, I saw her grandmother. A pause. And I'm still here. Another pause. Longer. Damen could hear Marcus breathing on the other end of the line, and he could hear Marcus not saying several things that Marcus was choosing not to say, which was one of the things he valued most about the man. Chicago called, Marcus said finally. Caruso's people reached out again. They want to discuss the Halstead Street properties. Tell them next week. I told them that last week. Tell them again. Damen, Marcus, next week. The silence on the line had a texture to it. All right, Marcus said, but you should know. The reach-outs have been more frequent. Whatever Caruso is thinking about, he's thinking about it harder. Damen filed that in the back of his mind where it belonged and said, I'll deal with it when I'm back. Is there anything that needs me today? Nothing that can't wait. Good. He ended the call and put the phone in his jacket pocket and looked at the house again. The kitchen window was lit. Someone was up. He wondered if Elena had slept. He wondered if she had stood at the window in the night and seen his car and what expression had been on her face when she did. He wondered if he had any right to wonder about that. He walked back up this gravel drive, slowly, and sat down on the bottom porch step because the chairs were Connie's chairs and felt like more than he had earned. He sat on the step in the cold early morning and waited for the sun to come up over the mountains, and the light came gradually and completely, the way light does in the desert. Not the tentative gray dawn of a city morning, but something more deliberate, more thorough, a light that didn't leave anything in shadow that it could reach. The screen door opened at 7:12. He heard it and did not turn immediately. He heard footsteps on the porch boards, not Connie's quick, light step, but something slower, more deliberate. And he understood before he turned around. He turned around. Elena stood at the edge of the porch with a cup of coffee in both hands and an expression on her face that was doing several things at once, none of which she appeared to be entirely in control of. She was wearing a loose gray shirt and dark leggings, and her hair was down, which it almost never was when she was moving through the day. She was, he thought, the most visibly pregnant he had ever seen anyone in person. And the reality of it, standing here, three-dimensional, entirely undeniable, hit him somewhere behind the sternum with a force that he absorbed without expression because he had 23 years of practice absorbing things without expression. She looked at him for a moment. He looked at her. "You slept in the car," she said. "Yes." "That's not—" She stopped, started again. "You didn't have to do that." "I know. There's a Holiday Inn in Mesa." "I know." She pressed her lips together. She looked out at the desert and then back at him, and something moved across her face. Frustration, he thought, but frustration at herself, not at him, which was more complicated. "Why are you here, Damen?" He had been thinking about how to answer that for 16 hours. He had turned it over every way he knew how. He had considered the honest answer and the strategic answer and the answer that sounded best and the answer that was most likely to accomplish something. And what he had arrived at was this. He was done with the difference. "I saw you at the airport," he said. "In Phoenix, 6 weeks ago." Something shifted in her face, immediately, completely. "You were coming through the terminal," he said. "I was there for a meeting. I didn't plan it." He paused. "I saw you, and I understood. And I got on a plane back to Chicago, and I sat in my apartment for 6 weeks, and I kept coming back to the same thing." "What thing?" "That I told you to do something, and you looked at me, and you walked out." He held her gaze. "And you kept her." The word her sat between them. Elena's hands tightened around the coffee cup. "You don't get to make that about you," she said. Her voice was controlled, but the control was costing her. "What I decided. It was mine. You made your position clear. I made my choice. Those are two separate events." "I know they are." "Then what are you doing here?" "I don't know exactly," he said. "I know that's not what you want to hear, but I don't have a plan. I'm not here because I figured something out. I'm here because—" He stopped. He looked at the desert, then back at her. "I'm here because staying in Chicago felt like a lie I couldn't keep telling." Elena stared at him. He watched her take a breath, slow and deliberate, the way she breathed when she was managing something she didn't want to lose control of. "You don't get to come here and be different," she said. "You don't get to show up in the desert and sleep in your car and be the changed man. That's not how this works." "I'm not asking for anything. You're asking for something just by being here. Your presence is an ask. You know that." He did know that. He had always been good at understanding the way presence functioned as leverage, and he recognized that she was right, that showing up was itself a move, and that she was wise to name it. "You're right," he said. "I'm sorry." She looked at him when he said that, just looked at him for a moment, with an expression that he couldn't fully read. Wariness and something else, something older, something that had been there since before everything went wrong. "You can't stay here," she said. "I know." "I need you to understand that I'm not—" She stopped. Put the coffee cup down on the porch railing, turned back to him. "I spent 4 months convincing myself that I was fine, that she was enough. That I had what I needed and I didn't need anything from you and I was not. I am not going to let you come here and undo that. I'm not trying to undo anything. Then what are you trying to do? The question sat there. Damon looked at his hands. He had large hands, which had always seemed incongruous to people who expected a man who ran an organization through intelligence to have more careful-looking hands. He looked at them on his knees and thought about all the things those hands had done, all the things he had built and protected and dismantled and controlled, and he thought about what it would mean to simply be present without an agenda, which was something those hands had never done. I want to know her, he said quietly. My daughter. I want to be there when she's born, if you'll let me. And if you won't, I'll understand, but I needed to say it. The silence lasted a long time, long enough that a hawk circled once above the desert flats and was gone, long enough that the sun moved perceptibly higher and the shadows on the gravel drive shortened by a visible degree. Get off my porch, Elena said. But her voice had changed. It was softer, and that made it harder to hear. Damon stood. He picked up the jacket he'd set on the porch step. There's a coffee place in town, Connie said from behind the screen door, which neither of them had realized had opened. Opens at 7:30. You could come back around 9 with some of that lemon coffee cake they do on Thursdays, if you wanted something to do with your hands. Elena turned to look at her grandmother. Connie was looking at the middle distance with the serene expression of a woman who had not just said anything in particular. Gram, Elena said. I'm just saying there's a coffee place. Damon looked at Elena. Elena looked at the desert. Her jaw was tight and her eyes were bright, and he knew her well enough to know that she was fighting herself right now, not him, and that whatever she decided in the next 10 seconds was going to cost her either way. 9 o'clock, she said. She did not look at him. Don't be late. Don't bring anything else. And do not think this means anything. Okay, he said. He walked back down the gravel drive. He did not let himself feel anything about it until he was in the car with the door closed, and then he sat for a moment with his hands on the wheel and his eyes on the road ahead and breathed slowly, the way he used to breathe before difficult negotiations. Except this was different, because in difficult negotiations, he was never the one with everything to lose. 9 o'clock turned into 10 days. Not planned. Nothing about any of it was planned, which was itself a novelty that Damen was slowly, uncomfortably learning to tolerate. He got the coffee cake the first Thursday and came back at 9 and sat on the porch with Connie while Elena worked inside, and then Elena came out for 20 minutes with a glass of water and did not speak directly to him but did not tell him to leave, and he understood that as the thing it was. Not welcome, not rejection, but the small opening of a door that had been sealed shut. He found the broken fence on day 3. He had arrived with coffee for Connie and was walking back to his car when he noticed the section of post and rail fence along the property's east edge had come apart at the base. The post rotted through, the rail sagging into the dirt. He stood looking at it for a minute. He went to the hardware store in town and came back with the materials and spent 4 hours in the desert sun repairing it. And when he was done, his shirt was through with sweat and his hands were bleeding at one knuckle from a nail that slipped. And he went to his car and drove to the Holiday Inn in Mesa and did not say anything to anyone about it. Connie mentioned it to Elena that night over dinner. Elena said nothing. He fixed the porch step on day 5. The second board from the top had a soft spot that gave underweight, and he had noticed Elena stepping over it each time she came out, the small automatic adjustment of a person who has cataloged a hazard and routed around it without deciding to address it. He came at 7 in the morning before they were fully up and replaced the board and was back in his car by 8:15. Elena stood on the step the next morning and looked at the new wood and then looked down the drive at his car, and her face did the thing it had been doing more frequently. The thing where the careful, neutral expression she maintained slipped for just a moment into something unguarded and then reassembled itself. On day 7, she came out to where he was sitting on the porch at 3 in the afternoon and sat down in the other chair and said, "Stop fixing things." He looked at her. Why? Because it makes it harder. He sat with that. Okay? She was quiet for a moment. She kicks in the afternoon, she said, not looking at him. Every afternoon around 3, like clockwork. He did not say anything. He was aware he was not supposed to say anything, that what she had just offered him was something she had offered despite herself, a piece of information that had slipped past the wall she was maintaining, and that the correct response was simply to receive it. "She's going to be stubborn," Elena said. "She'll be yours," Damen said. "So, yes." Elena looked at him then. The expression on her face was complex and unresolved, and he held it without trying to do anything with it. "You should know," she said, "that I haven't decided anything about any of this, about what I want from you or what role you have, or—" She stopped. "I haven't decided. I know. I need you to not push. I'm not pushing. You're here every day. I can stop coming." She was quiet. "I didn't say that." She stood up, her hand going to the small of her back the way it did when she'd been sitting. A gesture that had become familiar to him in 10 days, in the way small things become familiar when you're watching someone closely and honestly for the first time. "Don't stop coming," she said. "Just don't push." He nodded. She went inside. He sat on the porch for another hour in the afternoon heat, and it was, he thought, the most useful hour he had spent in years. The call came on a Thursday evening, which was day 11. He was in his room at the Holiday Inn, reviewing the land acquisition files he had been using as cover for the trip and which had gradually become an actual project because he needed something to do with the parts of his brain that weren't occupied with the desert and Elena, and the conversation they were slowly, painfully having when his phone rang and he saw a number he didn't recognize, which meant he recognized it. He answered. "You've been in Arizona a long time." The voice was smooth, unhurried, and carried the particular confidence of a man who was accustomed to being the most dangerous person in any given exchange. Vincent Caruso. Damon's hand tightened on the phone. He did not let it show in his voice. "Vincent," he said, "I wasn't aware we were in contact." "We weren't. I thought it was time." A pause. "I heard you've been looking at land out there. Desert property, ridgeline area." The words landed precisely the way they were intended to land. Damen felt the cold move through him, and he let it, and he kept his voice even. "I have some investments in the area." Another pause. "I heard Elena is out there too. Your ex-wife. Expecting, I understand." The smoothness of the voice didn't change. That was the tell. Not a change in register, but the absence of one. The practiced ease of a man delivering a threat he had rehearsed. "Congratulations, by the way. Fatherhood is a different kind of weight." "What do you want, Vincent?" "I want what I've always wanted. What Marcus's people have been delaying for 3 weeks. The Halstead Street properties, full portfolio, and I want the lakeside contracts transferred without the broker markup your people have been running." "That's not how those properties are structured." "I know how they're structured. I want them restructured." "And if I decline?" The pause this time was different, shorter, and with something underneath it. "Then I start thinking about why Damen Voss has been sitting in a desert town in Arizona for 11 days. And who else might find that interesting?" The line went quiet. Damen sat in the hotel room with his hand on the phone and his eyes on the middle distance, and he ran the calculation in 4 seconds and didn't like any of the numbers. Caruso knew about Elena. Caruso knew about the pregnancy. Caruso did not yet know, probably, what he intended to do with that information, but the fact that he had offered it meant he had done the research, which meant he had resources in the right places, which meant this was not a casual inquiry. This was leverage, specifically and carefully constructed leverage. "I'll have Marcus reach out," Damen said. "Sooner rather than later," Caruso said. "Give Elena my regards." The call ended. Damen set the phone on the nightstand and sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the wall. The air conditioning hummed. Outside, the desert dark pressed flat against the window. He had built an empire on knowing how threats worked and who made them and what they actually wanted. Caruso wanted the properties. That was real. But the mention of Elena, the mention of the pregnancy, the precision of 11 days, that was a demonstration. That was Caruso showing him the shape of what he held, which meant Elena was no longer invisible, which meant everything he had believed about keeping his old world away from the desert, from the porch, from the 10 days of coffee and broken fences and a woman slowly, carefully deciding whether to let him stay. All of it was no longer a separate compartment. The two worlds had just made contact. He picked up his phone and almost called Marcus, and then he set it down again, because the first thing he needed to decide was not tactical. The first thing he needed to decide was whether to tell Elena. The old instinct was immediate and familiar and wrong. Handle it. Manage the threat. Keep her out of it. Make the problem disappear before she knew it existed, and maintain the carefully rebuilding proximity he had spent 11 days earning. He sat with the instinct and recognized it for what it was and what it would cost. It was the same instinct that had produced 4 words in a rainy penthouse. Take care of it. The same calculus. Protect by controlling, protect by deciding for her, protect by removing her from the equation and handling the variables himself. It was the move of a man who trusted his own judgment above everything else and had never understood that the move itself was the damage. He had 11 days of evidence that a different approach was possible. 11 days of porch steps and broken fences and afternoon kicks and don't stop coming. He had 11 days of Elena Vale slowly, against her better judgment, deciding he might be capable of being something other than what he had been. And now he had a threat that was moving toward her whether or not he told her. He picked up the phone and dialed Elena's number. It rang 3 times. He had not called her number in 6 months. He had not been sure she still had the same number. She picked up on the 4th ring. Her voice was cautious. Damen, I need to talk to you, he said. Tonight. Can I come to the house? A pause. It's 9 o'clock. I know, it's important. Another pause, longer. He heard her breathing on the other end of the line. He heard, distantly, Connie's television in another room. Come to the house, Elena said. I'll leave the porch light on. He drove the 20 minutes to the property in the desert dark, and when he pulled up the gravel drive, the porch light was burning yellow against the night sky, and Elena was standing at the screen door, and she took one look at his face when he came up the steps, and she said, "Tell me." And so he did. He told her all of it. Caruso, the properties, the 11 days, the fact that someone in his old world had been watching, had tracked him to Ridgeline, had connected the dots between Elena and the pregnancy and what it meant. When he finished, the silence on the porch was absolute. Elena was standing very still. Her arms were crossed over her belly, not a defensive posture, but a protective one, both hands flat against the swell of her daughter, pressing lightly, the way she had been doing unconsciously for weeks. Her face had gone the particular careful blank of a person who is processing something too large to immediately react to. He knows where I am, she said. Yes. He knows about the baby. Yes. She looked at him. And you were going to, what? Handle it, not tell me. I thought about it, he said. For about 45 seconds. Then I called you. You thought about it. Elena, you sat there, she said, and her voice was rising now, controlled but rising. And your first instinct was to not tell me again. Your first instinct was to make a decision without me about something that directly concerns me and my daughter. I know. And you are standing here telling me that as if it's a confession that helps? As if saying I almost did the thing doesn't mean you're still the man who almost did the thing. I called you, he said. That's what I'm trying to tell you. I had the instinct and I recognized it for what it was, and I called you. I'm telling you everything right now. That's what I came here to do. She was breathing hard. She pressed her hands against her stomach and looked at the desert dark beyond the porch railing, and he could see her fighting something. Not him, herself, the same fight she'd been having for 11 days. The fight between what she knew he had been and what she was trying not to want him to become. What does he want? She said. Properties? Business? He's been trying to acquire my portfolio for months. He's using you as leverage to accelerate that. And if you give him what he wants? It doesn't end. It never ends with men like that. You give them one thing and you've shown them the shape of what you'll give up to protect what matters. So what do you do? He looked at her. I don't know yet, but I'm not doing it without telling you. The porch light buzzed softly. Somewhere in the desert, a coyote called once and went quiet. Elena stood at the railing for a long moment, And then she turned and looked at him with an expression he had never seen on her face. Not trust, not yet, not trust, but something adjacent to it, something that lived in the same neighborhood and might, with enough time, turn into it. "You should have told me immediately," she said, "the second you got off the phone. I know. This is my life, my daughter's life. You don't get to be the one who decides what I need to know about threats to my own safety. You're right." She held his gaze. "If you ever do that again, I won't. Don't promise me things, show me." He nodded. She moved toward the screen door and stopped with her hand on it, her back to him. "Go back to the hotel, come in the morning, and Damen," she didn't turn around, "don't disappear on me tonight." He understood what she was asking. She was asking him to stay in the radius, to not go handle it, to not vanish into the machinery of his old world and come back with a solution she hadn't been part of. She was asking him to be present with the problem instead of disappearing it. "I'll be here," he said. She went inside. The screen door closed between them. And somewhere in Chicago, Vincent Caruso made a second phone call that Damen did not yet know about. A call to a man named Steele who did the kind of work that didn't leave paperwork. And the clock that had been ticking in the background of the last 11 desert days began, without announcement, to run faster. He was back at the house by 7 in the morning. Not because Elena had told him to be there at 7. She had said, morning. And morning in the desert started early, and he had not slept in the hotel room anyway. Had lain on top of the covers in his clothes and stared at the ceiling and run the Caruso problem through every angle he knew until his mind was raw from it. He had called Marcus at 5:30 and given him the outline. Marcus had listened without interrupting, which was how Marcus listened to things that were serious. And when Damen finished, Marcus was quiet for a moment and then said, "How much does he know?" "Enough," Damen said. "Steele?" The name landed in the silence of the hotel room like something dropped on a hard floor. Marcus said it the way you say the name of something you've spent years trying not to have to say. Damen had heard the name 3 times in his career, and each time it arrived connected to a situation that had moved past the point of negotiation. "I don't know yet," Damen said. "If Caruso's using Steele, I know what it means." Another silence. Then, "You need to move her." Damen had sat up on the edge of the bed then, elbows on his knees, phone pressed to his ear, looking at the floor. "She won't go." "Make her understand. Marcus. She's 8 months pregnant, and she'll make her own decisions. That's the entire problem and the entire point." He pressed his fingers to his eye socket. "Set up a meeting with Caruso, Chicago. Whatever he wants to talk about, I'll talk. And if he's already sent Steele, then I need to be moving fast. Get me on a flight back tonight." He had ended the call and sat on the edge of the bed and breathed slowly and thought about what he was about to do, which was leave, which was go back to Chicago and walk into whatever Caruso had arranged and use every piece of knowledge and leverage and carefully hoarded information he possessed to dismantle the threat before it could reach the desert. The old way, the familiar way. And then he had thought about what Elena had said on the porch. "Don't disappear on me tonight." He had not disappeared. He had come back in the morning, but he was going to disappear soon, and the question was whether he was going to tell her before he did, or whether the old pattern was going to reassemble itself despite everything. Elena was on the porch when he arrived. She had coffee, and she was watching the eastern mountains do the thing they did at this hour, the color moving through them like something alive. And when his car came up the drive, she did not turn around immediately, but he could tell from the set of her shoulders that she had been watching for him. He got out of the car and came up the drive, and she finally turned, and her face was tired. She had not slept either. He could see it in the careful way she was holding herself, the particular posture of a person who has spent the night at war with their own mind and hasn't fully won. He sat on the step. She sat in the chair above him. They were quiet for a minute. "I need to go back to Chicago," he said. She nodded once, slowly. "I figured. I need to meet with Caruso directly. What he's doing, coming at me through you. It means negotiation is still open. If it wasn't, he wouldn't have called. He would have just moved." "And if it's a setup?" "It might be." She looked at him for a moment. "You could just give him the properties." "I can't." "Why not?" Because then he knows what you're worth to me, Damen said, and that doesn't go away. That becomes the permanent shape of what he can take from me. Every time he needs something, he comes back to the same place. Elena turned her coffee cup in her hands. She understood this. He could see her working through it, the logic of it, the particular terrible math of it. She was a lawyer's mind in a crisis, which meant she ran the scenarios even when she hated the scenarios. How dangerous is this? She said. I don't know yet. I need to get there and find out. What aren't you telling me? He looked at the gravel drive. The morning light was fully up now, and the desert was going from gold to its daytime bleached white, the heat beginning its slow, patient arrival. He thought about Marcus saying the name Steele. He thought about what Elena had said. Don't make decisions without me. There's a man, he said, named Steele. He does contract work, the kind that doesn't leave records. He heard her breath change. I don't know if Caruso has engaged him. Marcus doesn't know yet, but if he has, then this isn't about properties, Elena said. Her voice was very level. It was the voice she used in a courtroom, he guessed. The voice that didn't show what it was carrying. No. Then you need to go, she said. You need to go right now, and you need to handle this. He looked up at her. She was watching him with an expression that was not what he had expected. Not fear, not anger. Something harder than both of those. Something that had been forged, he understood, over the 6 months she had spent in the desert building something that belonged entirely to her, and she was not going to let it be taken. I'm going to call you, he said, every day. You pick up or you call me back within an hour. If I can't reach you, I know, she said. I'll have Connie stay close. He nodded. He stood up. They were standing facing each other on the porch, and there was something between them that neither of them had named, and neither of them was going to name right now, because right now there was no room for it, and they both understood that. Damon, she said. He stopped. She held his gaze for a moment. Come back, she said, simple and direct, and costing her something. He looked at her face, the tiredness in it, the determination, the guarded, complicated thing she had been building toward him for 11 days, and he said, I will. He walked back down the drive to his car. He did not look back. He did not trust himself to look back and still get in the car. He landed in Chicago at 6:14 in the evening, and Marcus was waiting at the curb. Damon got in the car, and Marcus pulled into traffic without speaking, which meant he had things to say and was organizing them. Damon waited. Outside the window, the city came back around him like a second skin. The density of it, the gray and glass architecture, the lakefront silver in the early evening light. He had been in the desert for 11 days. Chicago felt simultaneously like home and like something he was returning to from a significant distance, and the distance was not geographic. Steele is in Chicago, Marcus said. Damon absorbed that. Since when? Best I can tell, 3 days. He flew in from Atlanta under a name I had to dig for. He's staying at a property on the north side that Caruso owns through a holding company. Marcus glanced at him. He's not in Arizona. Yet. Yet. Damon looked at the road. What does Caruso think he has on me? The properties are the stated position, but the real position, Marcus shifted lanes. I've been doing some reading on the Caruso operation over the last 12 hours. He's overextended. 3 development projects in Milwaukee that went sideways, a distribution arrangement in Detroit that fell apart in September. He needs capital movement, and he needs it in the next 90 days, or he's going to have problems with the people above him. Damon sat with that. He's not doing this from strength. No, he's doing this from a corner. Marcus's voice was careful, which makes him more dangerous, not less. A man in a corner was a man who would do things a man with options wouldn't do. Damon knew this. He had been the man in the corner more than once, early in his career when the architecture of what he was building had not yet solidified, and he remembered the particular clarity of that position. The way having nothing left to lose cleared the mind of everything except the immediate calculus of survival. Set up the meeting, Damon said. Neutral location, not his, not mine. I want 3 days to prepare. He's not going to wait 3 days. Offer him something small in the meantime. Something from the Halstead portfolio, the East parcel. It's the least leveraged piece, and it's worth enough to demonstrate good faith without giving him anything structural. Marcus nodded. And Steele? Damon was quiet for a moment. Keep watching him. If he moves toward a flight to Phoenix or anywhere near Arizona, I need to know before the wheels are up. Understood. Marcus turned the car onto Lakeshore Drive. There's one more thing. Something in his voice made Damon look at him. I got a call this afternoon, Marcus said. From Reeves, the man you met in Scottsdale. Damon frowned. About the property? Not about the property. Marcus kept his eyes on the road. Reeves has been doing some secondary work for Caruso. Not primary. Support, logistics, that kind of thing. He reached out because... Marcus paused, and it was a pause Damon did not like. He said Caruso knows about the baby. Not just that Elena is pregnant. He knows it's a girl. He knows the due date. The interior of the car went very still. He knows the due date, Damon repeated. January 14th. Damon said nothing. The date was correct. He did not know how Caruso had obtained it, but the date was correct, and the fact that Caruso had offered it to Marcus through Reeves, had deliberately surfaced it, meant one thing. It was a demonstration of depth. Caruso wasn't telling them he knew about a pregnancy. He was telling them he had access to medical information, which meant he had a source inside Elena's world, or close enough to it to matter. Someone's been watching her, Damon said. That's what it looks like. How long? I don't know. Damon pressed the back of his hand against his mouth and breathed through his nose and looked at the city moving past the window and did not let the cold that was moving through him reach his face. He thought about the 11 days. He thought about the coffee and the porch and the broken fence and the morning light on the mountains. He thought about Elena standing at the screen door saying, "Come back." And underneath all of it, underneath every careful, patient thing he had been trying to build, someone had been watching, which meant the 11 days had not been the private, bordered thing he had believed them to be, which meant Caruso had not learned about Ridgeline from tracking Damen. He had already known about Ridgeline. He had known about Elena before Damon arrived. Pull over, Damon said. We're on Lake Shore. Pull over, Marcus. Marcus pulled over. Damon got out of the car on the shoulder of Lakeshore Drive with the lake dark and massive to his right and the Chicago skyline in front of him, and he stood in the cold evening wind and called Elena's number. It rang, once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th ring she picked up and said, "You landed?" "I landed." He kept his voice level. "I need you to listen to me very carefully." A pause. "What happened?" "Caruso knew about you before I got to Ridgeline. He had information about the baby, so specific information. Your due date." The silence on the other end was absolute. "Elena?" "I'm here." Her voice had changed, gone to the courtroom register. "I need you to think about whether anyone has been near the house. Anyone you didn't know. Deliveries, cars on the road. Anyone Connie mentioned." He heard her breathing, heard her thinking. "There was a man," she said slowly. 2 weeks ago. He said he was doing a survey of the road easement. He walked the property line. Connie talked to him for a few minutes. What did he look like? She described him. Damon listened and said nothing and filed it. "Pack a bag," he said. "You and Connie, go to..." He stopped. He was about to name a location, and he stopped himself because naming a location over a phone line that may or may not be secure was exactly the wrong thing to do. "Don't go anywhere yet. I'm going to send someone. Someone I trust. He's going to come to the house and he's going to help you move. His name is Cortez. He'll call you from my number first." "Damon, I know this is... I know." He pressed his hand against his chest, against the cold that was sitting there. "I'm sorry. I should have moved faster. Stop apologizing and tell me we're going to be safe." "You're going to be safe," he said. And then, because he had decided in the last 30 seconds that he was done with the difference between honest and strategic. "I don't know exactly how yet, but you're going to be safe." Another silence, then, "Okay," she said. "Okay. Call me when Cortez is on his way." She ended the call. Damon stood on the shoulder of Lakeshore Drive in the cold evening wind and breathed, and then turned and got back in the car. "Get Cortez on a flight to Phoenix tonight," he said. Marcus was already on his phone. Ashbab. The meeting with Caruso happened not in 3 days, but in 36 hours, because Caruso called Marcus the next morning and said he was done waiting, and Damon agreed to the timeline because the faster this moved, the better. And because every hour that Steele was in Chicago and not moving was an hour Damon could use. They met at a restaurant in River North that Caruso owned through a legitimate hospitality group, a private dining room on the second floor with good sight lines and 2 exits, which Damon noted immediately upon entering. Caruso was already seated. He was 53, compact, with the kind of physical stillness that men develop when they've spent enough years making other people nervous. He was eating bread, and he did not stand up when Damon came in. Damon sat across from him. He did not order anything. Neither of them spoke for a moment. "You look tired," Caruso said. "I'm fine," Damon said. "Let's talk about what you want." Caruso set down the bread. He folded his hands on the table and looked at Damon with the careful attention of a man taking inventory. "The Halstead properties, the lakeside contracts, and I want a seat at the table on the Detroit liquidation." "The east parcel on Halstead I can arrange," Damon said. "The rest isn't structured for transfer. Restructure it. That takes time. You have 60 days. Damon held his gaze. "And Steele goes home." Caruso's expression didn't change. "I don't know what you're referring to." "Vincent." Damon kept his voice flat and even and completely without heat. "I've been in this business for 23 years. I know when someone is making a demonstration, and I know when someone is making a genuine move. Right now you're making a demonstration. So let's skip the part where we pretend otherwise." Caruso looked at him for a long moment. Then he picked up his water glass, took a sip, set it down. "Steele is a consultant," he said. "He consults on security arrangements, nothing more. Then send him back to Atlanta and your security is still intact." "Maybe I'm not finished consulting." "Then we're not finished talking," Damon said. "And this gets longer and more expensive than you need it to be right now. I know about Milwaukee. I know about Detroit. You're not here because you're strong, Vincent. You're here because you need a resolution by the end of the quarter, or you've got problems upstairs." The stillness across the table got a different quality, not the relaxed stillness of a man in control, something tighter. "Be careful," Caruso said. "Quiet. Careful." "I'm always careful," Damon said. "Here's what I'm offering. The east parcel on Halstead, clean transfer, no complications, within 30 days. A consulting fee arrangement on 2 of the lakeside contracts, not a transfer, a fee arrangement, that will give you the capital movement you need for the quarter. In exchange, Steele goes home, you pull your surveillance on Ridgeline, and we don't have this conversation again." Caruso studied him. "That's not everything I asked for." "No, it's what you actually need. The rest was negotiating room, and we both know it." A pause. Outside the private dining room, the restaurant noise was a low murmur of ordinary life. People eating lunch, talking, existing in a world that had nothing to do with this room and the weight inside it. Caruso picked up the bread again and broke a piece of it slowly. "The woman," he said. "She's important to you. The arrangement I'm offering you is good regardless of anything else." "That's not an answer." "It's the only answer you're getting," Damon said. Caruso was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I'll have my attorneys review the Halstead transfer structure." He stood up. "Don't make me wait." He walked out of the room. Damon sat alone at the table. He breathed. He looked at the half-eaten bread on Caruso's plate and the water glass with the lipstick of condensation on the outside, and he tried to read the meeting. The tells, the angle of retreat, the specific way Caruso had not said no. He called Marcus from the car. "How did it read?" Marcus said. "He'll take it." Damon watched the city move past the window. "But he's going to try one more thing first. To show he can." "Yes." Damon looked at his phone. He had a missed call from Cortez from 20 minutes ago. He felt something tighten in his chest. "I'll call you back." He called Cortez. Cortez picked up immediately. "I'm at the house," he said. His voice was wrong, too controlled. the voice of a man managing information carefully. "What happened?" Damen said. "The women are safe," Cortez said first, which was the right thing to say first, and hearing it, Damen's lungs unlocked. "They're both safe, but—" Cortez paused. "Someone was here, last night, after I arrived. A man came to the property. I intercepted him at the property line." "Steele," Damen said. "He didn't give a name. I handled the situation." Damen ran his hand over his face. Steele had been in Chicago yesterday, which meant Caruso had a second man in Arizona that they hadn't known about, which meant the surveillance was deeper than Marcus's intelligence had shown, which meant Caruso had not been making a demonstration with the Steele information. Steele had been the misdirection. The real move had already been on its way to Ridgeline, while Damen was sitting across a restaurant table talking about property transfers. He had been outmaneuvered, cleanly, precisely, by a man who needed the win badly enough to move simultaneously on two fronts. "Elena," he said. "She's inside. Cortez hesitated. "She knows someone was here. She's not... She's holding it together, but she knows." "Put her on." A pause. Then Elena's voice, and whatever she had been holding together, cracked open the moment she heard him, not into tears, but into something rawer than that, something that had been compressed under the surface of the courtroom register. "There was a man at the property line," she said. "Cortez dealt with it. But Damen," her voice dropped. "I felt her stop moving." His entire body went cold. "The baby," he said. "Elena, she's moving again. She started again about 20 minutes later. The doctor says..." Cortez called a doctor. She came to the house. "She says stress can cause that, temporary reduction in movement. She says everything is okay." A breath. "But Damen, she stopped. For 20 minutes she stopped. And I thought..." "I know," he said. "I know." "You need to end this," Elena said. The rawness in her voice had compressed back into something harder. Not the courtroom voice, something new, something that had been forged in the last 20 minutes in a desert house with a man at the property line and her hand pressed against her stomach, waiting for her daughter to move. "Whatever it takes. I don't care what it costs. You need to end this." Damen sat in the back of the car with the city moving around him and heard the thing in her voice and felt it land in a place inside him that had not been accessed in a very long time, if ever. "I'm going to end it," he said. "Don't tell me. Do it." He ended the call. He sat in the silence of the car for exactly 10 seconds. Then he said, "Marcus?" Marcus, who had been driving without speaking, said, "Already thinking about it. Caruso is overextended. Milwaukee and Detroit are the pressure points. But he's also got exposure on the River North properties, the hospitality group. 3 of those buildings are in a tax arrangement that won't survive a regulatory review. I know someone at the state level," Marcus said carefully. "Make a call. That's a different kind of move than you've made before. I know what kind of move it is." Damen looked out the window at the city that had been his entire world for 23 years. The streets he knew by feel, the buildings he had bought and sold and used and occupied, the whole layered geography of what he had built. And he understood for the first time that he was looking at it the way you look at something you are about to put down. Not destroying it, not running from it, setting it down deliberately with both hands because you have finally understood what it weighs. "Make the call," he said, "and get me everything we have on Steele, not surveillance, everything." Marcus glanced at him in the rear view. "You're going to offer him something." "I'm going to offer him a way out that Caruso can't," Damen said. "And then I'm going to let Caruso figure out what that means." Marcus drove. Damen sat with his hands in his lap and his jaw tight, and the cold, clear mind that had gotten him through 23 years of difficult rooms, and underneath it, deeper than strategy, deeper than the calculus of leverage and pressure, something that had not been part of his operating system before the desert, before the 11 days, before the sound of Elena's voice on the phone telling him the baby had stopped moving. He was afraid, not of Caruso, not of Steele, not of the regulatory exposure or the properties or the quarter-end pressure that had turned a dangerous man toward his family. He was afraid of the 20 minutes Elena had spent with her hand on her stomach in a desert house waiting for her daughter to kick. He was afraid of what those 20 minutes had felt like for her, what they had cost her, and that the cost existed at all because he had made a life that made that cost possible. That was the thing sitting in his chest as the car moved through Chicago. Not strategy, not anger. The particular fear of a man who has finally understood what he stands to lose, and that understanding arrived, Marcus would say later, in a quieter moment, too late to be comfortable and just in time to matter. His phone rang. Unknown number, he answered. Mr. Voss. The voice was unhurried and colorless, like a room with nothing in it. My name is Steele. Damon's hand tightened on the phone. I figured you'd call eventually. Caruso thinks the meeting went in his favor, Steele said. I thought you should know that he's already moved the timeline up. Whatever he told you about 30 days, the real timeline is 10. Damon said nothing. He was listening to the voice and listening beneath it and processing the fact that a man Caruso had sent to Arizona was now calling Damen Voss directly, which was not the behavior of a man following instructions, which meant something had shifted. Why are you telling me this? Damen said. Because Caruso doesn't pay on time, Steele said. And you have a reputation for honoring arrangements. A pause, brief and flat. I don't touch families. That's a line I don't cross. What happened at the property last night was someone else. Caruso brought in a second man I wasn't informed about. I want you to know that was not me. Damon sat with that for a moment. What do you want? Walk away from the Chicago operation, Steele said. All of it. Give Caruso what he's asking for. Not because he deserves it, because the thing you're building in Arizona is worth more than the thing you're protecting here, and you already know that. Another pause. I'll handle the arrangement with Caruso's second man. Consider it a professional courtesy. The line went silent. Damon looked at the phone in his hand. He looked at Marcus in the rear view. What just happened? Marcus said slowly. Someone decided to be honest with me, Damon said, which was when Marcus's phone rang. He glanced at it, and his face did something it almost never did. It's Reeves, Marcus said. The man from Scottsdale. Damon looked at him. The same man, Marcus said carefully, who gave us the tip about Steele being in Chicago. The pieces assembled themselves in Damon's mind with the cold, mechanical certainty of a man who had spent 23 years learning how arrangements actually worked beneath the surface of what they appeared to be. And what assembled itself was not the picture he had been looking at. Reeves had told them about Steele. Steele had gone to Arizona and been intercepted by Cortez. Steele was now calling Damon directly, offering information, claiming he didn't touch families, and advising Damon to walk away. Reeves was Caruso's man, who had fed them intelligence about Steele, which had drawn Cortez to Arizona, which had left Caruso's second man, the one Steele claimed he hadn't known about, free to approach the property while everyone was watching Steele. It had not been a misdirection. It had been a channel, a carefully constructed tube designed to move Damen's attention in the precise direction that left the real exposure open. Reeves, who had met Damen in Scottsdale, who knew Damen had been in Arizona, who had, 11 days ago, been the reason Damen was in Phoenix at all. Don't answer that, Damen said. Marcus set the phone down. The car was quiet. Outside, Chicago moved past the windows, indifferent and immense, and Damen sat with the understanding that had just assembled itself and felt the full weight of it settle into his bones. Reeves had not been a coincidence. The meeting in Scottsdale, the property, the one-day trip, the reason Damen had been at Sky Harbor at all, had not been routine business that happened to put him in the same terminal as Elena. Someone had arranged for Damen Voss to see his pregnant ex-wife at an airport. Someone had known about Elena months before Caruso made his first call. Someone had moved Damon to Arizona deliberately and waited and watched 11 days of porch coffee and broken fences and a man slowly becoming someone different, and had let it happen, and had let Damen believe he was acting of his own accord. And the entire architecture of the last 11 days, the most honest 11 days of his adult life, had been built on ground that someone else had prepared. He did not know yet who, he did not know yet why. But he knew, sitting in the back of the car with the cold, clear certainty of a man who has just seen the room for what it actually is. that the most dangerous thing about an enemy who wants to change you is that sometimes they succeed and you don't find out until you've already become someone who can be hurt in ways the old version of you could not. He was a father now, in every way that mattered, and somebody had known that before he did and had decided to use it. He sat with it for 6 hours before he moved. 6 hours in the hotel room with the drapes pulled and his jacket on the chair and his phone on the nightstand and the cold thing in his chest that was not fear anymore, but something past fear, the place fear goes when it burns through its fuel and leaves behind only clarity. He ordered coffee he didn't drink. He sat at the small desk and wrote things on hotel stationery in his cramped, angular handwriting. Names, connections, timelines, the specific geography of what he now understood, and then he sat back and looked at what he had written and followed the lines to where they led. They led to Reeves. Not to Caruso. Caruso was the visible problem, the declared threat, the man across the restaurant table talking about properties and timelines. Caruso was the thing you were supposed to be looking at. The deeper problem was Reeves, who had arranged the meeting in Scottsdale, who had put Damen on a plane to Phoenix, who had made sure Damen was at Sky Harbor on a specific afternoon when Elena Vale walked through the terminal. Caruso had not built this. Caruso was overextended and reactive and had latched onto a situation that someone else had constructed. The question was who had built it. The question was what the construction was for. He called Marcus at midnight. "I need everything on Reeves," he said. "Not the surface, the full history, who he's worked for, who recommended him to me, every deal he's been involved in that has any connection to Elena, to Arizona, to anything that touches the last 2 years." Marcus was quiet. "You think this goes back further than Caruso?" "I think Caruso is the last chapter of a story someone else started writing." He heard Marcus breathe. "It's going to take time." "You have until morning." He ended the call and sat in the dark room and thought about Elena. He had not called her since the conversation in the car. He had told himself it was because he didn't have anything solid yet, didn't want to alarm her further without knowing more. The honest accounting was different. He didn't know what to say. He didn't know how to explain that the 11 days he had believed were his own, the porch, the coffee, the broken fence, the afternoon she told him the baby kicked at 3 o'clock, might have been arranged. That the airport moment, the one that had broken something open in him, might have been engineered. He didn't know what that made the 11 days. He didn't know if it unmade them. He sat in the dark and could not answer that. Marcus called at 5:47 in the morning with a voice that had not slept. "Reeves has been working for a man named Gerald Holt for the last 4 years, Marcus said. He's not organized crime. He's finance, private equity. He's been acquiring distressed assets in the Midwest for the better part of a decade, and he's good at it. He identifies situations where there are obstacles to acquisition, and he removes the obstacles." Damen was already sitting up. "What does he want with me?" "Not you specifically, your operation." Marcus paused. "More specifically, the land. You've been sitting on 14 acres in the Kinsey corridor for 6 years. You bought it as a hedge, never developed it. Holt's been trying to get to it for 2 years, and you've turned down every approach because the approaches came through brokers and you didn't recognize them as connected." Damen processed that. 14 acres in the Kinsey corridor. He had bought it at a distressed price in 2018 and held it because the numbers didn't pencil for development yet. He had not thought about it in months. "What's it worth now?" he said. "To Holt's fund, with the development plans they've been sitting on. 60 to 80 million. The number sat in the silence of the hotel room. "He used Caruso," Damen said slowly. "Caruso's pressure on the other properties was supposed to make me liquidate, sell under duress, including the Kinsey parcel." "That's what it looks like," Marcus said. "And Reeves, the Scottsdale meeting, the whole thing, that was Holt's people making sure you were destabilized, making sure your attention was split, making sure you had a reason to be in Arizona instead of Chicago, watching the operation." Damen stood up and walked to the window. He pulled the drape and the Chicago morning came in, gray and flat, the lake invisible in the early mist. "And Elena?" Marcus was very quiet. "Marcus." "Holt's people identified Elena as a pressure point 8 months ago," Marcus said. There's a woman in Elena's building in Phoenix, the apartment she stayed in briefly before going to Ridgeline. She works for a property management company that Holt owns a stake in. She was reporting on Elena's movements. 8 months. Before Damon had gone to Arizona. Before the airport. Someone had been building this architecture while Damen was in Chicago thinking his divorce was a private matter, thinking the thing with Elena was finished and sealed. The airport, Damen said. Reeves arranged your flight routing to go through Phoenix specifically. The Scottsdale meeting was real. There was a genuine property to discuss, but the routing was chosen. Damon put his hand flat on the cold glass of the window. Outside, the city was beginning its morning. The first lights moving on Lakeshore Drive, the gradual accumulation of a day. And he stood with his palm on the glass and breathed and let the full shape of it assemble. He had been moved like a piece on a board. His divorce, his guilt, the airport, Elena's face through the terminal glass, the instinct toward the desert, all of it had been framed and arranged and lit from the right angle. And what had happened as a result of all that arrangement was real. That was the thing he kept returning to. The 11 days were real. Whatever Elena had been building toward him was real. The baby was real, and the morning light on the mountains, and the 3 o'clock kicks, and her voice on the phone saying, "Come back." Real things built on arranged ground. He did not know yet what that meant for the ground. He knew what it meant for the things. "Get me a meeting with Holt," he said. Marcus inhaled sharply. "Damon, not through brokers, direct, my number to his number, today." "He's not going to—" "Tell him I'll sell the Kinsey parcel," Damon said. "Tell him I want to discuss terms. He'll take the meeting." A pause. "And when you're in the room with him, I'll figure out what to do with him when I can see his face." Gerald Holt was 58 years old and looked like money that had been old long enough to forget it was ever new. He was tall and gray-haired and wore the particular kind of suit that was expensive in the way that didn't advertise itself. And he had an office on the 47th floor of a building on Walker Drive that looked out over the river and the city with the proprietary ease of a man who believed in the fundamental rightness of his own position. He stood when Damen came in, which was a courtesy, and extended his hand, which Damen shook, and gestured to the chairs near the window, which Damen took. There was no one else in the room. Holt had sent his assistant out. Whatever this was, he wanted it private, which told Damen something about how much he knew and how much he was willing to acknowledge. "Mr. Voss," Holt said, "I've been hoping we'd get to sit down." "I know," Damon said. "You've been arranging it for a while." Holt's expression did a small, careful thing. Not surprise. Adjustment. The recalibration of a man who had planned for several conversations and was now identifying which one he was in. "I don't know what you've been told. I've been told enough," Damon said. "Reeves, the Scottsdale meeting, the routing through Phoenix, the woman in Elena's building." He watched Holt's face as each item landed. "You want the Kinsey parcel. You've wanted it for 2 years. And rather than make a direct approach, you built a situation designed to distract me and destabilize my operation until I was too pressured to hold it." Holt was quiet for a moment. He looked at Damen with the assessing, unhurried attention of a man who is deciding how much of his position to defend. Then he said, "You're a hard man to approach directly." "You didn't try." "I did. Twice. Through brokers. The offers were declined without response. Because I didn't know they were connected to anything real. You came through channels that looked like noise." Damon leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees. "You should have called me yourself." Holt studied him. "Would you have taken the call?" "Probably not," Damon said, "but it would have been cleaner." He held the older man's gaze. "What you built, using Caruso, using the pregnancy, using Elena, that's not a property negotiation. That's an attack on my family. And I want you to understand that I'm separating those two things very deliberately right now, because the property is a transaction, and transactions can be resolved. And what you did to my family is a different category of problem entirely." The word family sat in the room. Holt looked at it. "My people acted outside their instructions with respect to—" "I don't care," Damon said. "Simply and absolutely. Your people are your instructions. You don't get the distance." He sat back. "Here's what I'm going to offer you. Once. The Kinsey parcel at a fair market price. Not distressed, not under duress. A legitimate transaction, documented, clean. In exchange, Caruso is handled through whatever arrangement you have with him. Steele is gone. The surveillance on Elena and the property in Arizona ends today, and the woman in the building in Phoenix is reassigned. Holt looked at him for a long moment. And if I decline, then I spend whatever time and money it takes to pull every string I can find in your operation and make sure that every regulatory body and every institutional investor who has money in your fund understands the methodology you use to acquire assets. But Damon's voice did not change in temperature or volume. I'm not threatening you, Gerald. I'm describing the alternative. The room was very quiet. 47 floors below, the Chicago River moved through the city the way it always had, indifferent to the specific human arrangements taking place above it. Holt picked up a pen from the desk and turned it slowly in his fingers. You'd walk away from the Chicago operation. I'm walking away from it regardless. The Kinsey sale accelerates a transition I've already started. Damon looked out the window at the city. I'm not the man you researched when you built this thing. That man doesn't exist the way he did. He turned back. You spent 8 months engineering a situation to move a man who had already started moving on his own. You just didn't know it. Something shifted in Holt's expression, just slightly. An adjustment again, but different this time. Not recalibration, but something closer to recognition. The look of a man who has been operating on an outdated model of the situation. The parcel, Holt said. Fair market. Fair market. Holt set the pen down. I'll have attorneys draw up a term sheet. You have 48 hours, Damon said. After that, my offer changes. He stood. Holt stood. They did not shake hands this time. Damon walked to the door and stopped with his hand on it and turned back. The woman in Elena's building, he said. Today. Holt nodded once. Damon left. He was on the elevator going down when his phone rang. Cortez, he answered immediately. Talk to me. She's in labor. Cortez's voice was controlled and fast. It started about an hour ago. She didn't want me to call you yet. She told me to wait. But her grandmother said to call. We're taking her to the hospital in Mesa, Banner Desert. The elevator reached the lobby. Damon was already moving toward the door. How far apart? He said. 7 minutes when we left the house. Maybe less now. It's early. She's only 37 weeks. Damon hit the lobby doors and came out onto Wacker Drive into the cold Chicago morning, moving fast. Phone to his ear, hand up for a cab. Is she scared? Cortez paused. She's... Another pause, and in the pause, Damon could hear something in the background. A voice. Elena's voice. And the sound of it, tight and controlled, and underneath that control something very human and very afraid, landed in his chest like a physical thing. She's asking for you, Cortez said quietly. A cab stopped. Damon got in. O'Hare, he said to the driver. Fast. He kept Cortez on the line. Tell her I'm coming, he said. Tell her I'm already in the car. She can hear you, Cortez said. Damon looked out the cab window at the city moving past, the streets he had known for 23 years, the skyline he had oriented himself by, the whole geography of the life he had built and was now putting down. He pressed the phone against his ear and said, Elena, I'm coming. I'm in a cab to O'Hare right now. I'm going to be there. A sound on the other end, not words, just breath, and something in the breath that was more than he could hold without it changing the expression on his face, so he stopped trying. The next flight's in 40 minutes, he said. I'm going to make it. He did not make it. The flight was delayed 22 minutes at the gate. Mechanical, a crew notification system, nothing that could be argued with or leveraged or resolved through the particular force of personality that had gotten Damen Voss through 23 years of difficult rooms. He sat at the gate with his phone in his hand and his jaw so tight it ached, and he watched the minutes move on the departure board and could not do anything with them. He called Cortez every 15 minutes. The labor was progressing fast, faster than the doctor had expected for a first delivery. Elena was 5 centimeters when they arrived at Banner Desert. 6 by the time the plane finally pushed back. He lost reception somewhere over the flat center of the country and sat in the airplane seat with his hands on his knees and the phone dark in his hand, and he did what he had not done since he was a child. He sat with something he could not control and did not reach for a way to manage it. He landed in Phoenix at 3:41 in the afternoon. He had 3 missed calls from Cortez and 1 from Connie Vale, and the particular cold certainty of a man who is already reading the situation from the calls alone. The specific pattern of them, the timing, the fact that Connie had called, which she had never done before. He called Cortez. It rang once. "Where are you?" Cortez said. "Just landed." "What happened?" A pause, 1 beat. "She's here," Cortez said. "She's okay. Elena's okay. The baby—" Another pause, and in the pause, Damon's entire nervous system compressed into a single point. "She's here, Damen. She's small, but she's here. She came about 40 minutes ago." He stood in the Phoenix terminal with people moving around him and pressed his palm flat against the nearest wall and breathed. "Does she have a name?" he said. His voice had something in it he did not try to control. "Elena hasn't said yet. She said she was waiting." He pulled his hand off the wall and started moving toward the exit, toward the rideshare lane, toward the 90-mile drive to Mesa, and he moved with everything he had. Not the controlled, efficient movement of a man executing a plan, but the movement of a man who has finally understood that speed is not about strategy. It is about not wasting 1 more second of the time you have left to be somewhere that matters. The drive took 78 minutes. He did not remember most of it. He remembered the desert flat on either side of the freeway, the mountains ahead, the particular quality of the late afternoon light that he had been learning for 11 days and had not yet finished learning. He remembered thinking about the 14 acres in the Kinsey corridor and the 47-floor office, and the man with the expensive suit who had spent 8 months moving pieces on a board, and how none of it, not 1 square inch of it, would matter in an hour. He remembered thinking about the word that had come to him in the Phoenix terminal 6 weeks ago, when he saw Elena through the crowd and understood everything. Relief. He had not known then what he was relieved about. He understood it now, moving through the desert at 70 miles an hour toward a hospital in Mesa, where his daughter had been alive in the world for just over an hour. He had been relieved because the child existed, because Elena had refused the 4 words he had said in the rain, because somewhere in the machinery of who he was, there had been something that recognized, even then, even before the desert and the porch and the broken fence and the careful, costly progress of 11 days, that the child was a chance, not to fix what he had broken. You couldn't fix that. A chance to become the version of himself that had always been possible and had never been chosen. He parked in the hospital lot and got out of the car and stood in the afternoon sun for 1 second, just one, with his eyes closed and the desert air in his lungs. Then he went inside. Cortez was in the corridor outside the room. He stood when he saw Damen coming, and the expression on his face was the expression of a man who has witnessed something and is still carrying it. He didn't say anything. He pointed to the door. Damen stopped in front of the door. Through the small window in the door, he could see the room. The white walls, the monitoring equipment, Connie Vale sitting in a chair near the window with her hands folded and her eyes closed, and the particular stillness of a woman who has been through enough to know when to be still. And Elena in the bed, and in Elena's arms something very small wrapped in a white blanket. He pushed the door open. Elena looked up. She was exhausted in a way he had never seen on any human face, pale and wrung out, and her hair loose and damp at the temples. And she looked at him when he came through the door, and something crossed her face that was not one thing. It was several things at once, layered, the way important things always are, and he did not try to read all of them. He just came into the room and stopped at the side of the bed and looked at his daughter. She was very small, smaller than he had understood small to mean when applied to a person. She had Elena's dark coloring and a furious, concentrated expression, eyes closed, one fist pressed against her cheek, and she was the most specific and particular thing Damen Voss had ever seen in his life. Not abstract, not conceptual, not a future or a possibility. A person. Already entirely and specifically herself. He sat down in the chair beside the bed. His legs, he realized distantly, were not entirely steady. "You missed it," Elena said. Her voice was rough. "I know." He looked at her. "I'm sorry." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she looked down at the baby and said, "She waited as long as she could." He almost said something and didn't. He breathed. "Do you want to hold her?" Elena said. He nodded. He did not trust his voice. Elena shifted carefully and transferred the small bundled weight into his arms. And Damen Voss, who had spent 23 years being the most controlled man in any room he entered, held his daughter for the first time and felt something give way inside him that had been load-bearing for as long as he could remember. And the giving way was not destruction. It was the opposite. He looked at the face of the small, furious, entirely specific person in his arms, and he said quietly, to no one in particular, and to her in particular, "Lucia." Elena looked at him. Something moved across her face. "Lucia," she repeated, testing it, letting it sit in the room. She did not say yes, and she did not say no. She looked at the baby, and she looked at Damen, and she let the words stay in the room, which was its own kind of answer. And outside the window, the Arizona afternoon was going gold toward evening, the light coming in flat and honest and reaching every corner. His phone vibrated in his pocket. He ignored it. It vibrated again. He reached with his free hand and silenced it without looking at it. And he felt Elena watching him do that, felt her register what it meant. That there was a call coming in from whatever was left of the Chicago machinery, and he had silenced it without checking who it was. And he felt the quality of her watching him change. The phone vibrated a third time, then stopped. Marcus could wait. Holt could wait. Whatever was left of the arrangement with Caruso could wait. Whatever Steele was doing or not doing could wait. Everything that was not this room and this specific weight in his arms could wait as long as it needed to, and if it could not wait, then it would resolve itself without him. And he found, sitting in the hospital chair with the desert light coming through the window and his daughter's fist pressed against his chest, that he could live with that completely. The door opened behind him, and Connie Vale, who had been sitting in her chair with her eyes closed, looked up and said to whoever had come in, "He's here." And her voice had something in it that Damen did not expect. It sounded like relief. He turned, and standing in the doorway was Marcus, who should have been in Chicago, and Marcus's face was not the face of a man who had come with good news. And next to Marcus was a woman Damen did not recognize. Small, 30s, wearing a jacket that said Federal on it in letters that needed no explanation. And she looked at Damen and said, "Mr. Voss, I'm sorry to do this here." Elena's hand found his arm. He felt her grip tighten. The woman in the Federal jacket looked at him steadily and said 4 words that were, in their own way, the most clarifying thing anyone had said to him in 23 years of building a life on the opposite of them. "We need your help." And the room waited, and the baby made a small sound against his chest, and Damen Voss looked at the woman in the doorway, and then at Elena's hand on his arm, and then at the face of his daughter, and understood that the next thing he chose would be the thing that determined finally and completely who he actually was. Her name was Agent Dana Rice, and she had the particular brand of patience that federal investigators develop after years of waiting for the right moment to walk through the right door. She did not apologize again for the timing. She had said her one sorry, and she meant it, and she was done with it, which Damen respected, even as he held his daughter in his arms and felt Elena's grip tighten on his forearm and understood that whatever came next was going to cost him something he had not yet fully calculated. "Give me a minute," he said. Rice nodded. She stayed in the doorway. Marcus stayed beside her, and Marcus's face had the look of a man who had been briefed on something in the last several hours and was still integrating it. Damen looked down at Lucia. She had settled against his chest with the absolute trust of someone who had not yet learned that trust was a decision. Her fist was pressed against the front of his shirt, and her breathing was the small, rapid breathing of a new person. And he held her for 1 more minute, counted it, felt it, kept it. And then he transferred her back to Elena with both hands, carefully, the way you handle something irreplaceable. Elena took her and looked at him. Her face was exhausted and watchful, and he could see her running the same calculation he was running: the woman in the doorway, the federal jacket, the timing of it, what it meant. "How bad?" Elena said quietly. "I don't know yet." "How bad could it be?" He held her gaze. I've been in this business for 23 years, Elena. She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked down at Lucia and said, Go find out. He stood. He smoothed his jacket, which was a habit, a muscle memory from 23 years of walking into rooms that required a certain presentation, and then he stopped doing it and just walked to the door and out into the corridor. Pozzi. The corridor was fluorescent and smelled like antiseptic, and the particular institutional quiet of a building where serious things happen in ordinary rooms. Rice had stepped back from the door to give them space. Marcus was leaning against the wall with his arms folded and his eyes on the floor. Damen stopped in front of Rice. She was maybe 40, with dark eyes and the kind of face that had learned to give nothing away without effort. Talk, he said. We've been building a case on Gerald Holt for 14 months, Rice said. Asset fraud, securities manipulation. The methodology he uses to acquire distressed assets involves a systematic pattern of manufactured pressure, identifying owners, creating leverage situations, using third parties to deliver that pressure in ways that leave him clean. We have documentation on 6 acquisitions in the past 4 years. Yours would be the 7th. You were watching him work me. We were watching him work you, yes. The word work landed the way she intended it to, and Damen stood with it and did not let his face do anything. And you need me to testify. We need your cooperation, full documentation of the approach. Reeves, the Scottsdale meeting, the connection to Caruso, the surveillance on your ex-wife. All of it goes into a federal filing that gives us what we need to move on Holt. She paused. In exchange, we're prepared to offer full immunity for any exposure arising from your own operation, past and present. He looked at her. That's a wide offer. We know what you've been involved in, she said simply. We're not interested in it. We're interested in Holt. She paused. And in the 6 other families he did this to, who didn't have your resources to figure out what was happening to them. That landed differently. He had not thought about the 6 other acquisitions, the other people on the other end of the methodology, who had been pressured and surveilled and manipulated and had probably not had a Marcus to run overnight intelligence, or a Steele who decided to call and offer a professional courtesy. 6 other situations that had ended with Holt getting what he wanted from people who did not understand what they were dealing with. What's the timeline? He said. We'd need your formal cooperation within 72 hours. Deposition within 30 days. Trial date is already set. We have other witnesses. You're not the foundation. You're the close. He looked down the corridor. A nurse moved past them, pushing a cart. Through the window of the room, he could see Connie Vale leaning over Elena's bed, saying something, and Elena looking up at her and then down at Lucia, and the ordinary, profound weight of it, the simple human weight of it, pressed against the inside of his chest. Holt's attorneys are going to come at everything I've done, he said. Yes. It'll be public. Yes. My name will be in it. Mr. Voss. Rice looked at him with the direct, unhurried attention of someone who is not selling anything. Your name is already in things. This is a chance for it to be in something different. He stood in the corridor for a moment. Then he said, I need to talk to my attorney. Of course. And I need tonight. She looked at him. Something moved across her face. Not softness exactly, but something adjacent to it. A recognition of the specific circumstances of the room down the hall. Tonight, she said. Call me in the morning. She handed him a card. He took it. She walked down the corridor toward the elevator with the unhurried walk of someone who had learned to conserve energy for the long game, and the elevator came and she got in and the doors closed. Damen stood in the corridor and looked at the card for a moment. Then he looked at Marcus. You knew she was coming, he said. She contacted me 6 hours ago, Marcus said. I didn't know what she had. I came down to tell you in person. He paused. I thought you should hear it here, not over the phone. Damen nodded slowly. He folded the card and put it in his jacket pocket next to the hotel stationery from Chicago with the names and connections written in his handwriting, which now felt like something from a previous era of the day. When this is done, Damen said, when I've given them everything they need, I'm going to be finished, Marcus. Marcus was quiet. The operation, the portfolio, whatever's left after Kinsey, all of it. He looked at his oldest employee and the closest thing he had to a person who knew him entire. I'm going to need you to help me wind it down cleanly. Marcus looked at him for a long moment. I know, he said. I've been waiting for you to say it. You could have said it yourself. It wasn't mine to say. Marcus pushed off the wall and straightened. I'll start making calls in the morning. He looked at the door to Elena's room. Go back in there. Damen went back in. He stayed the night in the hospital. There was a chair that did not accommodate his frame, and he sat in it anyway. And sometime after midnight, Elena fell into the deep sleep of a person whose body has completed an enormous project, and Lucia slept in the bassinet beside the bed, and Connie curled into the other chair with a blanket a nurse had brought and slept with the practiced ease of a woman who could sleep anywhere she needed to. Damen did not sleep. He sat in the chair and watched his daughter breathe and thought about all of it. He thought about the 14 months Agent Rice had been building her case, which meant she had been watching Holt's methodology for nearly the entire time Damen's marriage was disintegrating, and his operation was running, and he was standing at windows in Chicago telling himself the choices he was making were the right ones. He thought about the 6 other families. He thought about the specific evil of what Holt had built. Not dramatic evil, not the visible and nameable evil of a man like Caruso, but the bureaucratic evil of a man who used systems and distance to manufacture damage and collect the proceeds without ever being in the room when the damage occurred. He thought about Elena's voice on the phone saying she stopped moving and the 20 minutes of waiting. He thought about what he was going to have to put on record in a deposition. 23 years of operational decisions, the things he had done that were clearly wrong, and the things he had done that existed in the gray space where wrong and necessary overlapped in ways he had never examined too closely. He thought about what it would mean to have all of it documented and filed and eventually public, to have his name attached to an honest account of what he had built. He thought about it for a long time and arrived, sometime around 3 a.m, at something that was not peace but was related to it. The honesty was the thing. Not the immunity, not the outcome. The honesty. He had spent 23 years building a structure that required constant maintenance of its own fictions, and the maintenance had been so complete and so habitual that he had mistaken it for character. He had been managing a performance of himself rather than being himself, and the performance had been good enough that even the people who knew him well had not always been able to tell the difference. The desert had been the difference. 11 days on a porch with nothing to leverage and nothing to perform, and nothing to offer except presence. He had been himself on that porch in a way he had not been himself in longer than he could account for, and it had terrified him, and it had also been the only thing in 23 years that felt entirely real. He was going to put it all on record, not because it absolved anything, because it was true. In the morning, when Elena woke and fed Lucia, and the room filled with the ordinary activity of a new day in a hospital, the nurse checks, the pediatrician's visit, Connie going down to the cafeteria and coming back with coffee that was bad in the cheerful institutional way, Damen sat on the edge of Elena's bed and told her everything. Not a summary. Everything. The structure of his operation, the specific decisions that had crossed lines, the things he had done that could not be characterized as anything other than what they were. He told her about Holt and Rice and the deposition. He told her about the immunity offer. He told her what going on record was going to look like, and what it was going to cost in terms of his name and his history, and the specific way the world would know him afterward. Elena listened with Lucia in her arms and her eyes on him, and she did not interrupt. When he finished, the room was quiet for a moment. "Why are you telling me all of this?" she said. "Because you told me not to make decisions without you," he said. "This is the decision. I wanted you to know what it means. If you're going to let me be here." She looked at him for a long moment. Her face was still tired, but underneath the tiredness, something had clarified overnight, the way faces clarify after the large physical event of birth, as though the body has shed something non-essential and what remains is more itself. "You think it changes things," she said. "It changes things for the people around me, for you, for her." He looked at Lucia. "I wanted you to be able to make an informed decision about that." "Damen," she shifted Lucia slightly. "I already knew what kind of man you'd been. I was married to you for 9 years. I'm not naive." She paused. "What I didn't know was whether you were capable of being a different kind. That's the only question that matters to me now." He held her gaze. "I don't know if I am," he said. "I know I'm trying." "I know," she said. That's why I'm letting you sit on my hospital bed at 7 in the morning. He almost said something and decided against it, which was itself a form of the difference. The old version of him would have used the opening, leveraged the warmth, moved toward the close. He sat on the edge of the bed and did not move toward anything. He just stayed where he was. Call the agent, Elena said. Tell her yes. He called Rice at 8:15. She answered on the first ring, which meant she had been waiting, which meant she had read the situation well enough to know he would call early. He said yes. She said she would have her team in Phoenix by end of day. He said he needed until 10. She said she'd give him until noon. He spent the next 4 hours on the phone with his attorney, a woman named Paige Acker, who had the clear, undecorated intelligence of someone who had been in difficult rooms with difficult clients for 20 years, and who, when Damen laid out the full picture, was quiet for approximately 4 seconds, and then said, I'm going to need the full operational documentation, everything Marcus has. And I need it clean, Damen. If this goes to deposition and something surfaces that I wasn't told about, it becomes a different kind of problem. There won't be anything you weren't told about, he said. There's always something, she said, not unkindly. Not this time, he said. I'm done with the difference between what I say and what's true. Another brief silence. Then, all right, Paige said. I'll be in Phoenix tonight. He called Marcus and told him to compile everything and send it to Paige. Marcus said it would take until evening. Damen said that was fine. Marcus said Damen, and then didn't say anything else. And Damen understood that he was trying to say something about the scope of this, about the 23 years, about the particular weight of deciding to set something down that you have spent most of your adult life carrying. I know, Damen said. You okay? He looked through the window of Elena's room, where Connie was sitting with Lucia in her arms, and Elena was watching them both with an expression that had nothing careful in it. Yeah, he said. I am. The deposition took 3 days. It was held in a federal facility in Phoenix, a conference room with a long table and a court reporter and Rice, and 2 other agents and Paige Acker across from Damen with her notepad and her clear, unflinching attention. Damen answered every question. He did not redirect, did not minimize, did not use the careful language of a man managing his exposure. He used the plain language of a man saying what happened. It was the most difficult thing he had done since the night he stood at the window and told Elena to take care of it, and it was difficult for the opposite reason. Not because it closed something, but because it opened everything, laid it flat on the table in the fluorescent light, and let it be seen in full. On the second day, one of the agents asked about a specific arrangement from 2019 that Damen had been sure they didn't have documentation on, and they did, and Paige's hand moved slightly on the table and Damen said, Yes, that's accurate, without hesitation, and felt the agent register the absence of deflection. After the third day, Rice walked him out to the parking lot and stopped beside his car. That's the cleanest deposition I've conducted in 14 years, she said. It wasn't clean, he said. It was honest. Those aren't the same thing. She looked at him for a moment. No, she said. They're not. She put her hand out. He shook it. We'll be in touch through your attorney. He drove back to Ridgeline. It was late afternoon and the desert light was doing the thing it always did at this hour. The gold going deep and the shadows stretching long. And he drove through it with the windows down because the desert air was something he had not finished learning yet. Holt's trial was 5 months away, but the mechanism had begun moving the morning Damen's deposition was filed, and mechanisms like that, once moving, did not stop. Caruso, faced with the evaporation of Holt's support structure and the simultaneous pressure of Marcus's call to the state regulatory contact, spent 3 weeks consulting his own attorneys before quietly agreeing to the original property arrangement Damen had offered. The East Halstead parcel, the consulting fee arrangement, clean, no further contact. His attorneys communicated this through channels that maintained the fiction that it was a business decision rather than a retreat, and Damen let them maintain that fiction because he was done spending energy on men who needed it. Steele went back to Atlanta. He did not charge for the Arizona work, which Cortez communicated with a straight face and no commentary. Reeves disappeared, which was not unusual for people who had been operating in the space between legitimate business and organized leverage. Marcus tracked him briefly and then stopped, because Marcus had a great deal of work to do winding down a 23-year operation and limited time to spend tracking a man who no longer mattered. The Kinsey parcel sold to Holt's fund at fair market rate, because the transaction itself was legitimate, and the sale was the cleanest resolution of a situation that had too many moving parts, and the proceeds went into an account that Damen was going to use to build something entirely different. He bought land in December, 40 acres outside Ridgeline, south-facing slope, the kind of land that had been left alone long enough to be itself, scrubby and honest and full of the desert life that most people drove past without seeing. He bought it with his own name on the deed, which was also new, the absence of shells and holding companies, and the careful distance of a man who had spent 23 years ensuring that nothing could be traced directly back to him. He broke ground in January, 2 weeks after Lucia's due date. She had arrived 3 weeks early, which Connie said had been characteristic of Elena at every stage of her life. On a small organic farm operation that was going to take 2 years to be viable and 5 years to be profitable, and which Damen had chosen specifically because it required the kind of patience that could not be manufactured or leveraged or accelerated by intelligence and strategy. It required showing up every day and doing the slow work and waiting for the land to respond. He was good at waiting now. He had practiced it on a porch. Elena was not there for the groundbreaking. She was in Ridgeline at Connie's house, which was where they both were, which was where Lucia was, and they had not made any formal decisions about what their arrangement was or would be. They had been living in the approximate proximity of people who were still deciding, which was its own kind of courage, to be in the uncertainty without forcing it to resolve before it was ready. She came to the land in February, on a Saturday, driving Connie's truck with Lucia strapped into the car seat that Damen had spent 45 minutes installing correctly the week before. He was working on the irrigation line when he heard the truck come up the access road, and he stood up with his hands dirty and his shirt through with sweat and watched her get out and unstrap Lucia and walk across the raw ground toward him. She stood at the edge of the area he had been working on and looked at the land and then at him. Lucia was in her arms, wide awake, taking in the desert with the concentrated attention of a 2-month-old who is still assembling the basic categories of existence. "It's big," Elena said. "It's enough," he said. She looked at him. He was, she thought. And she would not say this for another 4 months, would hold it for the right moment in the way she held the things that mattered, different in a way that was not performance. The difference was in how he held his hands when he wasn't doing anything with them, which was loosely, without the contained tension that had characterized every version of him she had known for 9 years. The difference was in how he looked at her, which was directly and without agenda, without the subtle engineering of a man always positioning for the next exchange. He looked at her the way you look at something you have almost lost and have not yet finished being grateful for. "Can I?" he said, and gestured toward Lucia. She transferred her over. He held his daughter against his chest with his dirty hands and his work shirt, and the desert afternoon spreading out around them, and Lucia grabbed the collar of his shirt with her fist and held on. They stood on the raw ground in the February light and did not talk for a minute, which was its own kind of conversation, the kind that only exists between people who have been through enough together that silence has weight and texture and meaning. "Paige called," Elena said eventually. "The trial date's been set, September." "I know, she called me too." "Are you ready for it?" He thought about it honestly. "No," he said, "but I'm going to do it anyway." She nodded. That was the right answer. She had learned in the months since the hospital that the right answers were almost never the confident ones. "Connie wants you to come for dinner Thursday," she said. "She's making the red chili thing." "I'll be there," he said. She looked at him for a moment longer and then looked at the land. The raw, unfinished, patient land with its long view toward the mountains and its absolute indifference to what anyone had been before they arrived on it. She had been in the desert long enough now to understand something about that indifference, the way it was not cruelty, but simply the nature of ground that did not carry the history you brought to it. You were what you did here, not what you had been. "It's good land," she said. "Yeah," he said. "It is." The trial happened in September, as scheduled, and lasted 11 days, and Damen sat in a federal courtroom and answered questions in the same plain language he had used in the deposition, and Paige sat beside him, and her hand moved on the table twice, both times when questions went to places she had not fully anticipated, and both times Damen answered without deflection and her hand went still again. Gerald Holt's attorneys were very good, and they did the thing Damon had expected. They went through his history with methodical, unapologetic thoroughness, every deal and arrangement and decision that could be characterized as anything other than clean, and they characterized all of it in the most unfavorable available light. And the court reporter typed all of it, and it became part of the record. Damon sat with it. He did not flinch, and he did not minimize, and he did not perform remorse for the benefit of anyone in the room. When the defense attorney asked him directly whether he considered himself a criminal, he was quiet for a moment and then said, "I made decisions that caused harm to people. Some of those decisions were illegal. Some of them existed in spaces that weren't clearly defined. I'm not the right person to characterize it. I'm just the person who has to live with it." The defense attorney waited for more, and Damon did not give more. He was done with the extra words. Holt was convicted on 9 of 11 counts. The sentencing was 60 days later. Damon was not in the courtroom for the sentencing. He was in Ridgeline, on Connie's porch, drinking the bad coffee that Connie made and would never apologize for, and Lucia was on a blanket on the porch boards doing the concentrated, furious work of a 4-month-old attempting to understand her own hands. His phone showed him the news alert. He looked at it and then set the phone face down on the porch railing. Connie looked at him. "Done?" she said. "Done," he said. She nodded and sipped her coffee and looked at the mountains and did not say anything else, which was the specific gift of Connie Vale, the ability to let a moment be what it was without covering it with words. He proposed in November. Not a production. He had thought about how to do it for 3 months, running the scenarios the way he still occasionally defaulted to running scenarios when he was nervous, and had eventually landed on the understanding that any scenario he engineered was the wrong one. So he did not engineer it. He was sitting on the porch at Connie's house on a Tuesday evening when Elena came out with 2 cups of coffee and sat in the other chair, and they sat in the last of the evening light, watching the desert go dark. And Lucia was inside with Connie, and at some point in the silence, Damon reached over and put his hand on top of Elena's hand on the armrest and said, "Marry me again." Not a question. He had done it as a question the first time, with a ring in a restaurant, with a speech he had rehearsed, and the speech had been good, and the restaurant had been beautiful, and the ring had been exactly right, and none of it had been the truth. This was the truth. 2 people on a porch in the dark who had been through enough to know what they were choosing. Elena looked at him. She looked at his hand on top of hers. She looked out at the desert for a moment, at the specific dark of a desert night that she had come to know, the way you come to know the face of someone you have decided to stay with. "Not yet," she said. He nodded. "Ask me again in spring," she said. "Okay." She turned her hand over so their palms were together. He closed his hand around hers, and they sat like that while the night settled over the desert, and the stars came out in the enormous, unhurried way they came out here, with no city light to argue with them. He asked her again in April, on the land, standing in the first green of the cover crop he had planted in February, which had come up slowly and imperfectly and entirely, and she said yes. The wedding was small. Connie's porch, which had been where all of it began in its truest form, not the 9 years in Chicago, not the penthouse, and the window and the rain, but the real beginning. The man sitting on the bottom step, because the chairs were Connie's chairs and felt like more than he had earned. 12 people who knew the actual shape of their story, which meant they knew the hard parts, and had chosen to be present anyway. Marcus came. He stood at the back of the small gathering in a good suit and looked at Damen throughout the ceremony with an expression that took Damen until halfway through to identify, and what he identified it as was pride, which surprised him and then didn't. Paige Acker came. She stood near Marcus and drank the good wine Connie had sourced from somewhere and said nothing about legal matters, which was the gift of a good attorney who understood that some occasions belonged entirely to the people living them. Cortez was there. He had taken a position managing security for the farm operation, which was technically unnecessary for a 40-acre vegetable farm in the Sonoran Desert, but which Damen had offered and Cortez had accepted with the same absence of commentary that characterized most of what Cortez did. Lucia was there, in Connie's arms, wearing a white dress that she immediately covered with the sleeve of Connie's sweater, and she watched the proceedings with the serious, concentrated attention that was already characteristic of her, a quality that was entirely Elena's and that Damen watched with a feeling he still did not have adequate language for. He was working on the language. He had time. The ceremony was short. They had written their own words, which had taken Elena 3 weeks and Damen 2 months, and which neither of them read aloud in the end. They had looked at each other in the morning before the guests arrived and decided without discussing it that the words were for them and not for the occasion, and what they said instead was simply what was true. I choose you, today and tomorrow and the day after that. Simple and enormous, the way all true things are. On the last night of November, almost a year after the hospital room and Agent Rice in the doorway, and the specific weight of Lucia in his arms for the first time, Damon sat on the porch with Elena beside him, and his daughter asleep inside, and the desert night doing what it did, which was open itself up to the cold and the dark, and the enormous population of stars that had no opinion about what happened beneath them. He had spoken to Paige that afternoon about the last of the operational dissolution. It was done. The portfolio, the arrangements, the remaining threads of 23 years of building something that had required constant vigilance and the management of a specific kind of fear, his own and everyone else's. Done. The only thing left with his name on it was 40 acres of high desert and a farm that had lost money for its first year in the particular honest way that growing things lost money before they didn't. He was not afraid of the farm losing money. He was not afraid of most things he had been afraid of before, which was the result not of becoming braver, but of becoming clearer about what mattered. Fear reorganizes itself around the things you love. He was afraid of losing Elena. He was afraid of not being enough for Lucia. He was afraid of the years of record, the public document of who he had been, following his daughter into rooms when she was older and couldn't understand the context. These were real fears, and he carried them the way you carry real things. Not comfortably, but without pretending they weren't there. Elena's hand was on the armrest between them, and he put his hand over hers, and she turned her palm up the way she had in November, and he held her hand in the dark. The cover crop came in better this week, he said. Connie said. She went to look at it Tuesday. She didn't tell me she came. She doesn't need permission. No, he said. She doesn't. The silence settled. Somewhere in the desert something moved, one of the small nighttime things that had business out there, and then it was quiet again. Are you okay? Elena asked. She was looking at the dark, not at him. He thought about the question the way she had meant it, not the surface of it, not the automatic yes that 23 years had trained him to produce. He thought about the actual answer. I don't know yet, he said, but I think I'm going to be. She squeezed his hand once. He squeezed back. Inside, through the screen door, he could hear Lucia making the small sounds she made when she was cycling toward waking, the tiny declarative sounds of a person in the process of arriving at consciousness, and Elena's head tilted slightly toward the sound the way it always did, the automatic attention of a mother who has learned her child's specific frequencies. She's going to wake up, Elena said. I know, he said. I've got her. He stood up. He went inside through the screen door and into the warm interior of the house with its accumulated smell of coffee and desert air and the particular living quality of a space that is fully occupied, and he went to where Lucia was stirring in her bassinet, and he picked her up before she fully woke, with both hands under her small certain weight, and she settled against his chest and made a sound that was not distress but recognition. He stood in the middle of the room with his daughter against his chest and the desert night outside the window and Elena on the porch, and Connie asleep in the back room and the farm quiet on its 40 acres to the south. And he understood that this was the thing he had been moving toward, through all of it, through 23 years of building the wrong thing, and 1 night in the rain, and 6 months of a lie, he told himself, and 11 days on a porch, and depositions and verdicts and cover crops, and a small wedding, and the slow, unmerciful, irreplaceable work of becoming someone his daughter would not have to explain. He stood in the room and held her, and she slept. It was enough. It was, he had come to understand, the most that anyone ever got, and more than most people allowed themselves to recognize. And he was not going to be the man who failed to recognize it twice. Outside, Elena sat on the porch in the dark and listened to the desert, and her daughter breathing, and the particular silence of a house where everyone you love is close enough to hear. She had not forgotten what he had done. She would not forget. The past was the past, and it existed permanently in the record, the way the deposition existed, the way the trial transcript existed, the way the specific night with the rain and the pharmacy bag and the 4 words that should never have been said existed. Forgetting was not the thing. Forgetting would have made the present smaller, would have cheapened it, reduced it to something sentimental, and therefore false. She had chosen this with full knowledge of what it cost and what it came from. That was the thing forgiveness actually was, not erasure, but a decision made in full light, with open eyes, by a person who has the right to make it, to move forward anyway. She had made that decision not because he deserved it, and not because it was easy, but because they both deserved the possibility of peace, and because her daughter deserved a father who was becoming instead of one who had finished. She sat on the porch until she heard Lucia settle and go quiet again, and then a little longer, because the desert night was very beautiful, and there was no reason to rush. Then she got up and went inside, and let the screen door close softly behind her, and the desert was left to itself, which was all it had ever needed.